Merced, vice chair of the Libertarian National Committee, um, guy who says libertarian things and pursues libertarian ends. I'm just here to rant, probably, but mainly just kind of to reflect on sort of what's going on, partly in the Libertarian Party, and just of course just my normal um, why libertarianism is important and what makes libertarians different. But first off, just a little bit of discussion about last night. So, for those who aren't familiar with the situation, is that the Libertarian National Committee has been sort of in a quandary, along with the Convention Oversight Committee, regarding how to handle the Libertarian National Convention that is supposed to occur in 2020. Okay, why? COVID-19, for the same reasons that events like South by Southwest had to be canceled. What happens is that there's a lot of things to consider. One, localities that have sort of stay-at-home orders, so you're not allowed to have events in there. States that basically force people from other states to quarantine. Cost of travel, people willing to risk their families because even if they don't catch it, or they don't exhibit symptoms, they might get in contact with the virus, come back, transmit it to their family and loved ones, and be none the wiser. So there's all these sort of different considerations that are kind of in the air. But there's also sort of in the air is like people who are concerned about, the Libertarian Party sort of not fighting to have that physical convention and giving in to fear and all these kind of things. And it's all part of the conversation. And essentially, and there's also the issue of sort of finances. If we were to outright cancel the convention, the potential amount of refunds that would be required would possibly pretty much empty out the coffers of the National Party. Okay, which wouldn't necessarily be very financially prudent as the National Committee to do. Okay, essentially, especially since we are fiduciary actors on a board of an organization. That's just generally how it works. You have to watch out for the life organization. That's kind of your legal responsibility. Cool. So there's all these considerations that are just sort of in there, and basically there's people that right now the current state of things that a motion has been passed to delay the convention to no later than July 15th. A location has not officially been decided. A date has not officially been decided. Nor is the conducting of any business prior to that later date necessarily been off the table. That's what's going to be discussed on Saturday. Everyone kind of has their opinion on what should happen. And then again, there's not just opinion, there's also interpretations of the party's bylaws, the party's policy manual. And again, the difference between the policy manual, the LNC policy manual, and the party bylaws is the LNC policy manual can be changed by the Libertarian National Committee. We can amend that. The bylaws cannot be amended by the Libertarian National Committee. That can only be altered by delegates at a convention. Okay, so to the extent that bylaws say you can't do X, you can't do Y, you can't do Z, to change those things requires some sort of convening of delegates. And this is sort of where, the possibility of a virtual convention gets really controversial. Because one possible idea on the table is to do the presidential nomination and then postpone the remainder of the business to that later date as a physical convention. The question is, what are the exact mechanisms to do that? Is there a mechanism to just have a separate online vote, or do you have to convene delegates, do the vote for president, and then postpone them and hope that the delegates will be okay with postponing the remainder of business? These are the kind of conversations that are kind of going on now, and sort of what does that mean in the bylaws, and what does that mean, and what precedents whatever decision gets sets. Because at the end of the day, these are unprecedented times, so any action sets a precedence, and every precedence isn't all that great. On the bright side, these are extraordinary times. So this sets a precedence for what goes on in extraordinary times, not necessarily normal times, depending on how you read it. And that's always the reality. You can't control how people are going to read the past in the future. Okay? You can only just try to be as delicate and do as little damage as possible. But, you just don't know the future. You don't know who are the players in the future, how they're going to treat the actions we took today, and how we treat the actions that people took yesterday in deciding how we act today. It is what it is. So that's sort of the discussion that's on the table. But one of the things that's kind of frustrated me a little bit is like during the mock convention last night, in which a lot of people had fair criticisms of. Okay, like me and pretty much I think all the LNC didn't find out till like early yesterday morning that they were going to do this mock convention, because it wasn't decided to be done until like yesterday morning apparently. But it was still worth doing, because at the end of the day, whether this convention in 2020 is done online, offline, or and again, there's always that's the other risk of postponing it, in the sense that what if in July, things don't get better, or they get worse, and you end up having a backslide, and then the event gets canceled again, and that we are going past July without a convention and without a presidential nomination. So these are sort of the risks that are on the table, and you can't control everything. You can only control what you can control, and focusing on what you can't control oftentimes is, well, a waste of time. But it's good to be aware of what you can't control. So there's that concern too. But the point is, like, everyone kind of has their opinion on like how this is handled, what risks are more pertinent, what risks have greater consequence, these kind of things. But at the end of the day, in the future, we will have to do more events online. It doesn't necessarily have to mean the national convention, but whether it's like large summits of libertarians, because it's a good medium to do stuff on. So being able to kind of figure out the logistics of how to do large-scale events online is a worthwhile endeavor. So I was glad that we did the thing last night, despite all the logistical challenges. And there were questions regarding like how do you properly credential delegates? Because I mean, last night the attempt was to see how you could do it purely through Zoom using Zoom Webinar. Okay, and that presupposes many things. Okay, you're presupposing that your constraints are you only have the tools that Zoom Webinar gives you, but as some of you might have seen this morning in the delegates Facebook group, on the LNC list, I proposed how you could expand and complement Zoom with the use of Slack, which could be a complementary use of Discord, because I know a lot of people like Discord. You could use other video platforms like GoToMeeting, GoToMeeting, WebEx, Adobe Connect. I've used many of them. I honestly do find Zoom to be much more intuitive and smoother, as far as getting people who've never used it before to use it. Okay, because oftentimes a lot of those other ones just require you clicking on this link and installing this plugin, and it's you have to do that a little bit with Zoom, but I just find the Zoom to be a lot quicker. But Slack, adds a lot of functionality that allows you to control sort of like how many people vote, being able, whether the votes, can you see who the individual votes come from on what. There's a lot of different things you can do, because Slack is very extendable, and at the same time it just makes it where you don't have to necessarily try to work around Zoom's limitations as much, because Slack can compensate for it. So that's sort of my 2 cents. But there are workarounds. Okay, even it's still, there are ideas out there for how you handle it if you did just Zoom, or if you switch over to Zoom Meeting, which has a different set of features. There's possibilities in how you run that event. And again, the main thing isn't whether we decide to do a virtual convention this way or not. That's a different debate. But trying to figure out how we could do this if we ever had to do this is important. It is a valuable exercise. So, constructive feedback is good, instead of everyone being dismissing. Some people being like, oh, well, this didn't go perfect, so of course we can never do this now. That's not helpful. Okay, if you don't want the national convention to be done that way, that's fine. That's if you do want it to be that way, that's fine too. Those are opinions, and those are part of a discussion that is being had right now. But at the end of the day, you want to make sure that the options you have on the table are all viable, because you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what the LNC is going to decide. I am one of many votes. There are many other votes, and it could go not just the ways that people think it might go, it could go in unpredictable ways. So you want to make sure that you have as good a shot, no matter what the outcome is, as possible. So being constructive, being helpful is good. Cool. So that's what I wanted to say, just about sort of national convention talk. Again, I'm not married to any particular solution. I'm not married to any particular outcome. I generally try to stay neutral when it comes to convention stuff, mainly because, and again, what I'm not neutral on is trying to address concerns. So I am concerned about people's health. I am concerned about the bylaws. I am concerned about the media that the presidential nomination will get, the campaign time the presidential nomination will get. I do care about all these things, and to the extent that a solution can be devised that addresses as many of these concerns as possible, that's what I would ideally like to see. But do I dismiss any of these concerns because one concern just to me overrides everything else? No. Okay. I take a look at all the problems on the table. I don't assume that any solution is sort of the best, and I listen to what everyone has to say. And to the extent that anyone has a solution, I'm going to offer suggestions. Even if I agree or disagree with the solution, I'm going to offer suggestions on how that solution can be better. Because even if the solution I disagree with, which again right now I'm kind of neutral, disagree with where to win, I would want it to be as successful as possible. Because I don't want to hurt people. Cool. And I mean, this is again a reason why, libertarianism is important. You've probably heard me make this point over and over again. But the idea of a world where more of our arrangements are transacted through consent, so instead of compelling people to do things, the more that we operate as individuals making choices in our life, the more camaraderie we are going to see. Because again, consent is not something without force. Then your only route to getting anything done is consent, which forces you to have to get along with people, to look for the best in people. Because if you just look for the worst in people, then you're not going to have many people to work with, which is going to make it really hard for you to get anything you want done. While in a world where you can compel things, or you can force people to do things, doesn't matter if they get along with you or like you can just force them to do what you want. And this is kind of why I feel like society has devolved a little bit over the years. Not because of some sort of, you'll hear people saying because people have become more selfish or their virtues have decayed. No, it's because the need to get along has become less and less and less as we exercise the lever of compulsion to get the things that we want. And that minimizes sort of that underlying incentive to get along. Okay. But the more sort of community cooperation, decides how, outcomes, the more, then building communities, building friendships, building relationships becomes much more important. And that's where free markets thrive, when we interact with each other and we work together, because that's what competition is. People will criticize markets based on competition, but all two competing businesses are two groups of people cooperating and hoping one has figured out how to cooperate better. And the one who cooperates better and works together better to optimize their ability to cooperate is going to win out in the market. Okay? And again, I know it's not that simple. There are other factors that determine sort of market outcomes and determine how people make choices and whatnot. But at the end of the day, it's only when people make choices that you can really see what happens when all those factors are considered. Instead of having some bureaucrat you say, hey, these are a few things that I think are the most important, so I'm going to compel the outcome that I want on everyone because these are the priorities that I see, and I'm going to project those priorities on everybody else. Okay, which is what naturally happens. So that's a different argument than necessarily just talking about like the efficacy of centralized decision making. There's a issue with the efficacy of centralized decision making and the lack of knowledge that it has. It's difficulty in adapting. It's difficulty in being accountable that makes it not effective. But then there's also the issue of sort of, even if it was effective, is it addressing sort of the right priorities, and what are the right priorities, and who decides what those right priorities are? And there's all these good reasons to be skeptical. It doesn't mean you have to be so skeptical of everything that your automatic response is always, no, I'm going to go protest everything they do. If they, if suddenly they agree with me, I'm going to protest that too. It's, but having a dose of skepticism, of moving away from consent, moving more towards sort of centralized decision-making and allocations of capital and everything else, is a healthy thing. Okay? Now, again, you always got to be careful to make sure that your skepticism doesn't cross the line into cynicism, where you're just always assuming everything is horrible and everything is bad and everyone is corrupt and everyone is just nefarious, and because that doesn't help either. One, it's kind of hard to get along with people when you're that person, because it gets frustrating, it gets tiring, it gets old, which means you're not going to have the critical mass to create the movements in society that you want. But also, again, if you're that person, I want you to have a happy life, and being cynicism is going to affect your ability to be happy. So skepticism is healthy, and I think, at minimum, the libertarian movement, injects a healthy level of skepticism wherever it's lacking in the political discussion, and at its best, we make change and free people up and save lives from bad decisions that could be made and thrusted upon a lot of people. But I still want everyone to have their best shot of happiness. So to the extent that I can remind people that to not let their skepticism become cynicism, I think that's a value. And again, I've been there. I've been to points where, I've crossed that line where, where I would just look at things and wag my finger just because that was just my natural sort of gut instinct to do so. So I understand that impulse, especially when I first became a libertarian. Because when you first, and I find this with like new progressives, new conservatives, whenever you first find an ideology, you feel like, like this thing has been like kept secret from you for a long time. So you're just naturally angry that you weren't this, and you're naturally sort of like wanting to just scream from the mountaintops. There's this idea, and it's a good idea, and I want to spread it. I like this idea. And you can be overzealous, over angry, over sometimes stretch too far, and sometimes rub you the wrong way. It's like I think Larry Sharp says this a lot, where it's like you think it's like the converted are the most zealous. So it's like when you convert, you become quite zealous in your beliefs. And I was. And it's not that my beliefs have changed over time. It's just my approach to, or my reflections on how society changes, how people change. How do you connect with people? All these kind of external things are sort of what has changed, as far as in my views, as far as changing like more not my approach to what I believe. I mean, if we were to sit there and get into the nit and grit details of sort of my libertarian thoughts on things, I'm pretty much as libertarian as you get. You find the rabbit hole, you'll find me near the bottom. But when it comes to expressing those ideas and building bridges for others to those ideas, those are sort of the areas where reflection and thought has kind of got me to sort of express myself quite differently than I did back in, let's say, 2008 and 2009. And there has been one or two little things where my views have changed. I would say when I was originally sort of a very far left progressive, and then I kind of took a right-leaning libertarian stance for a while, and then kind of nestled in a sort of more down the line libertarian, libertarian on everything type vibe. Okay. But for the most part, again, it's mostly been sort of just my reflection, just how people work and how people think and how people interact. It has changed over the years. That's kind of led me to be a lot more soft-spoken, a lot more inclusive, a lot more kinder than I may have once was. Although if you go watching my videos from like 2008, 2009, I don't think I was mean or anything. But I was certainly more cynical, more angry, more quick to believe the worst in every argument. But still nice. So now I'm just kind of rambling at this point, just because it's a live stream and I can ramble. And if you care to listen, you can listen. What I need to start doing is going back and recording some podcast episodes, or at least stripping the audio from some of these live streams and putting it on the podcasts. And if you don't subscribe to my podcast, you should. iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, just look up Alex Merced, you'll find it. Aside from that, that's my rant for today. I'm sure you guys will see me live stream again when when I have the urge and the time. But there's a lot of stuff going on. Also, on another note, I will be on LPTV tomorrow night, so I'll be hosting LPTV. So usually Nick hosts LPTV, but I'll be hosting it this week, and we'll be discussing ballot access. So I think we'll be having Oliver Hall and Richard Winger on to discuss ballot access. So do check that out. And then as well, then I'll be in the meeting on Friday, and I think at least in the beginning I will be gaveling the meeting in, because I gavelled the meeting out last Saturday, so that'll be fun. I'm definitely not as suave a presider as Nick, but I will do my best to kind of manage things and make the meeting as productive as possible. But cool. I'll talk to you guys later on. Have a great day, and